Sky-high used car prices and the shortage of cars in general are proven to be immensely huge problems for America as a whole. And if you want a deep dive on that particular issue, check out my last video. Link is on the screen. The basic problem, though, at the end of the day, is that there simply aren't enough cars available in the marketplace for people to buy. Why is that? It is because the automotive marketplace in the U.S. is far from the free market ideal that forms the basic underpinning for America's entire national identity. In fact, even Russia has a more free and open marketplace for new and used cars than the U.S. does. So how exactly did this situation arise? What are the main factors causing U.S. customers to have less choices and higher prices than their overseas counterparts? Well, it ultimately boils down to one thing: the Imported Vehicle Safety Compliance Act of 1988. What this means is that Americans, unlike Brits, Swedes, Russians, Australians, Japanese, Chinese, Kenyans, Emiratis, Malaysians, Pakistanis, and Mexicans, cannot just import a car from somewhere else if they don't like the selection that's available at their local dealer, or if they just don't like the system of car dealers in general. They have to buy a new car from a dealer, as the only new vehicles that can be sold legally in the U.S. are vehicles originally made to the U.S. government's unique regulations and specifications. Now, government safety regulations on cars exist everywhere. The problem is, while other countries like Mexico, Sweden, Australia, and literally every other country in the world use a set of codified internationally reciprocal set of vehicle safety standards codified by the UN, the U.S. government not only doesn't use these regulations, but refuses to recognize them as valid for vehicles to sell in the country. And like America's refusal to adopt the metric system, universal health care, paid parental leave, and the refusal to allow the superior Nestle Kit Kat bars to be sold instead of those imitation baby puke tasting Hershey ones to be sold or imported, it is a continuation of the long American tradition of doing things differently than the rest of the world, albeit things that have already proven to work worse in comparison to the way the rest of the world does it. And unfortunately, not only will this commitment to doing things differently yet worse likely be spun as American exceptionalism or but the costs of this will continue to mount upon the American people. Which gets us back to the car shortage. If the U.S. government were to strike down the Imported Vehicle Safety Compliance Act of 1988 tomorrow, there would be immediate relief to the used car shortage. Why? Because this piece of legislation is the only reason the used car shortage exists in the first place. To explain this, time for a brief economics lesson. In any properly free and international marketplace, where goods can flow freely between one country and another, if the price of good X, with good X being any product, is cheaper in country A than country B, one can expect merchants to buy up products from country B en masse and export them to country A. The increased demand in country B will drive up the price of good X there, and the inflow of good X into country A will lower the prices there, and this will continue until the prices of good X in country A and country B reach parity. Classic price arbitrage. And the used car market in the U.S. used to be open like this, as during the 1980s, a weak Deutschmark meant it was cheaper to buy a Mercedes-Benz in Germany than in the U.S. And because German showrooms are factory showrooms without the pushy salesman and had lower prices due to the weaker Deutschmark, it was a no-brainer. And many parallel importers were bringing German market Benzes and undercutting the official distribution channels, i.e. the car dealers in the U.S. However, like angry dictators that don't get their way, the U.S. dealers got salty, and eventually they were able to lobby U.S. politicians for the passage of the Imported Vehicle Safety Compliance Act of 1988, ending the free market in the U.S. for cars. Surprise! A big corporate interest in America conspiring to ruin life for average people in the pursuit of protecting profits. So predictable. Totally didn't see that one coming. Currently, homologating a car for sale just in the U.S. can easily add an additional $100 million to manufacturers' costs of developing a new car. And it's not like the car industry operates on huge margins. They don't. In fact, they're some of the lowest of any industry. Only 7.5% on average, making them only slightly more profitable than grocery stores. So that huge cost just to sell a car to Americans is only worth it for the highest volume models. The result is the Walmartification of the product offerings in the US. Cheap, big, mass market, and no specialty options and customization available. Deal with it, folks! Using the analogy of Japanese cars equals Chinese food, if the rest of the world gets the option of Peking duck and dim sum, Americans are forced into the General Tso's chicken and beef and broccoli, and they are told by the oily fossils of government officials that the Peking duck and dim sum are unsafe and not fit for their consumption. And for anyone that's had authentic Chinese food, the real stuff is so much better than the Americanized garbage. And authentic Japanese cars made for the Japanese market, in my experience, are the exact same way. The real deal is so much better than the Americanized products passed off as Japanese at car dealers in America. Guess what? That Honda Civic you think is Japanese, made in Ohio. If that law were to be repealed, a multitude of positive effects would occur. Firstly, the current used car shortage would be significantly eased, as importers could bring in gray market vehicles from other nations that have historically and currently have a surplus, like Japan. And furthermore, true exposure to the international market would mean Americans would gain much more choices than they currently have in form, in function, and in pricing. It would also allow Americans to travel overseas to purchase cars, which would open the third-party franchise dealer model monopoly in the U.S. up to actual competition, forcing them to improve their customer service experience and offer more competitive prices if they, want to justify their existence and survive, which is already on thin ice. And this would also have the effect of exposing Americans to vehicle forms that are previously unknown to them, like K microvans and small MPVs. And this would likely create a positive multiplier effect that would add large amounts of value to the economy in ways that couldn't even be predicted. New industries, new jobs, and new jobs to support the new industries. All are likely should this happen. Lastly, opening up the market would also lower the barrier for small, upstart vehicle manufacturers, allowing them to more easily grow and develop. This would ultimately improve the vehicle quality and international competitiveness of the American auto industry as a whole, something that former Vice Chancellor of Germany, Sigmar Gabriel, summed up brilliantly when former President U.S. Donald Trump complained, "It is unfair that the Germans are not buying more American-made cars." The answer from Gabriel? Build better cars. Overall, Americans would benefit immensely if the Imported Vehicle Safety Compliance Act of 1988 were repealed and the U.S. government adopted the internationally recognized UN ECE regulations. Lower prices, better customer service, and better products being the biggest ones.